So all we know is 800 words or 700 words spoken in our presence. That's not very much. And what we are seeing from the Cambridge work is that they do present a lot of the detail of what they are studying. So for something like 200 something pages, maybe 125 pages are images. But it still means that they are writing about 100 pages. If I have a reservation about this particular work, it would be that the images are not always used analytically. It's like small, medium, large, extra large, with all sorts of images packed onto full pages of a book, and then you flip, right? And you no longer emphasize the continuity of the text, because the bigger the compilation, the less likely it is that it will be read from cover to cover like a novel. So people are flipping through it like it's a telephone directory from the 1980s or something like that. You dip into it every now and then. So the images sometimes they're just ornamental rather than analyzed. So I find that a little bit cheap, actually. Like that again. So there is a way for us to argue that ours is not 200 pages, but look, your 200 pages is a bit cheap too. So we're looking for some middle ground. And the crux is what I've already shown you in the case study images earlier on, that you do make a gestalt with 4 or 5 images talking to something, and you're reading something out of that one point. So this student is studying a particular famous theme in Chinese culture, the peach blossom spring. So it's a story from Taoyuanmei, and it has been painted many times. And she wants to think about how to develop a design with the cultural resources of this story and the painterly tradition that has developed in response to this story. So you'll find this line of work quite popular in mainland China, in Nanjing and in Hangzhou, and a few cities where the teachers are interested in the kind of appropriating from the tradition of painting certain ways of representing and imagining buildings. So there's this more illustrative approach to the site, and then eventually something in the actual site that she found, and she's thinking of working very closely with that. And she has a way of drawing, very sensitive, poetic drawing. I'm trying to show this. So it's fine grain drawing. So I actually complained about this. I said it was a bit of chinoiserie. Where are the ideas? So it's very beautiful drawings, actually. But when it gets to an architectural drawing, it's not so skillful. So it reminds us of a second or a third-rate university from mainland China, not quite so distinguished from University of Cambridge. So if you think about this.
Sorry, is this a project about drawing and representation, or is that a
It's an actual scheme.
It's a scheme.
Yes, for a particular site in China.
Okay.
So you can see our M1 students probably having a go at this and doing reasonably competitive work.
Why not?
So it seems to be a thesis where the pictorial function has taken the upper hand. We have had some business here similar to that, of course. So I think I've run out of time. I'll be very happy to answer questions if you have some questions.
Questions? I have a question. With the first part on the keywords, at some point, I guess the way the argument that you're creating is that you use keywords to construct a kind of articulation of a problem and then maybe in addressing whatever the issue is. But at some point, the design kind of mind comes, and sometimes the keywords you might want to divorce yourself from it. At some point, that might happen. When does the keyword starts to say, do you let go of, or do you always hold on to that and trying to develop a project based on those keywords, as opposed to those keywords being just the starting point?
Well, imagine week 1 to 4, you have 4 of these keyword diagrams, right? And you are changing it, and you are sometimes changing the scope of the diagram as well, because suddenly you may only limit the scope of the diagram of keywords to only the site analysis or only the program, and then the whole thing changes quite dramatically. You do iterations. You don't start with an ideal keyword cluster and then hope to make it work until week 12. I think that wouldn't be a good idea. And although I've emphasized keywords and key numbers, there should be a possibility of using key images. So suddenly you find 1 or 2 images, something you made, an image that you made yourself, or some image that you picked up from a publication somewhere, that they became really important for you to think about. Oliati probably has 6 of these very important images that he thinks about in his design. They're not specifically individual projects, but he just thinks about this. I think they're like a fecund image, like a plant or something like that.
Anybody?
I'm curious to know, in your earlier education, aside from perhaps the history and theory courses, have there been other opportunities to develop thinking along keywords and abstracts? This hasn't been studio-based, I would presume.
I think the emphasis in M1 has been on the drawings. We may have the words, but the words are not the moment that will stimulate the creativity in the imaging. But if we were to write up an M1 studio, it would be possible then to say in keywords where the creative action has been in one respect or another.
Well, I think the important part basically of this approach is basically that you can position your work also in an existing discourse. There are many discourses in a particular discourse that you actually define, right? And that is, I think, very crucial. And I think if you see all the kind of successful great architects that you might know, you maybe just might know more, their projects and so on. But I think what's really driving them often to do the next project is basically, the next project is basically to position themselves in this discourse a bit further here or there and so on, right? So for that, of course, it's very important that you basically read and you know a lot of things. So, no? So and I think it's probably really something that in our school, I think what I find in terms of technical skills and drawings and model making, and you work very hard, and I think you are, in all this, I think you can compete with, I guess, with every school that I've seen and so on. But I think in terms of the quality to show that you're not just kind of very busy of doing something and you have a lot of skills, but you also intellectually can be on the top of the discourse at this moment, right? For that one, you basically need to know, of course, those kind of different discourses that are there, or at least like some that you find particularly relevant, and then basically pitch your project towards either against or for and so on. Right? And as you say, probably in Western thinking, really what's driving most of these architects would be, let's say, nowadays maybe Venturi, Rossi, Eisenman, Bracklin, and so on. They basically saw their work always related to the work of others, maybe their teacher generation or their classmates and so on, and they basically formulated every project as something that answers to those kind of things. And of course, within the architecture discourse, but also, of course, outside in society, right? And I think if you could push it a little bit more on that level as well, I think you can get into the best firms in the world and so on. But I think, because also here in the practice, I think nobody, I mean, if you, in most of the practice in Hong Kong, there is not really a theoretical discourse, I would say. It's basically how you make amount of square footage for that particular client, so that you're, it's actually, and you will anyway get a job in Hong Kong, so that's why nobody's really taking care for that. But I think that is maybe the big difference if you would, I don't know, we have maybe, if somebody goes for exchange to those kind of Columbia, other universities and so on, this is really where they get grilled, right? But on the other hand, where you also take a lot of motivation for your work.
Now, I want to say two things about this. First, there could be, in the way I have talked about the diagramming with the keywords, a way of working while you are blind. You haven't thought it through, and you're simply swimming with 20 things in your head, and you try to sort them into some meaningful pattern that you can chat about with your advisor. At the end of the business, say in week 12 or in the final review in semester 2, you can do another version of it, which will be the looking back on the thing, and you will then have discovered what you had silently touched upon while you were blind, but now you can see a lot more clearly, and maybe the critics would have helped you along the way towards seeing the thing. So you could have front and back end diagramming of the keywords that are substantially different, and you would be able to put them side by side as a way of explaining how far you have come along. The second thing that I can say about this is also how in mainland China, people don't start by announcing a position like Eisenman would. You have Liu Jiakun saying, you know, we do what is right for this place. And what would usually happen in a mainland Chinese case is that you do a retrospective, and then you supply the missing keywords that has been implicit in the thinking, but they were not first using the label to motivate that. And then if you say collect 8 master plans, like yesterday in my group, we looked at 8 master plans to show how the iterations gradually allow something to emerge. It is not as if the architect had a great concept at first, but that you jiggle the thing, and then eventually there is a self-consistent thing that emerges, which can then be articulated in terms that are very specific and receivable in the Western discussion. But in the RIBA setup, of course, in the way you have read the PDF from Cambridge, the research comes first, and it's supposed to, in a linear way, feed into the designing. I wouldn't say necessarily you have to do it in the linear way, because more than half the time you will be blind to one thing or another that you're working on. And that shouldn't stop you from doing the interim work in a productive way nevertheless.
One question for you, how you see these keywords vis-a-vis the other way, of course, how you could approach a thesis by a hypothesis, right? Because usually you would start with a hypothesis, you assume something, right? And you make your project to find out, and later you see, well, it becomes a kind of proven thesis somehow. No, that's basically how in science and so on, I think you work. Now, your method, basically by using the keywords, is slightly different, but leaves a certain kind of openness also, right? Which I think can be actually, I think it's not by default or something. I think you probably thought about it, but maybe you could elaborate on that.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have this opportunity. The idea of the hypothesis is related to the sensitivity about assumptions and about reversals of assumptions. So if you used to think that the elevators and escalators must work in a particular typical way on a slope in a Hong Kong site, you could reverse the assumptions of thinking about that and come up with a different typological relationship to topography. So usually when we read the text just now, when we were inferring the questions that are implied, we could also read the thing and say what were the implied assumptions. And then that when you reverse that, that could be a moment of creativity for you. The hypothesis, usually in my own work, the hypotheses don't occur at the top level. The hypotheses are the smaller level operational assumptions that you make in order so that you don't doubt yourself a million times while you were thinking a little bit each day. So yeah, the hypotheses and the assumptions are, but the assumptions come back to the very Greek Western way of thinking too, that when you criticize something, you don't say it is wrong. You ask, what are the assumptions? And if you find that the assumptions are something that can be challenged, that is your moment to put in the knife. This is something that doesn't happen in mainland China very much. Usually the authoritarian side usually is sufficient that you say it's not like that. So that you don't have to work at the level of assumptions.
Okay, maybe we'll take a break, but thank you very much. We have the energy to continue with the second half, or we'll take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, okay. 5-minute break, and we'll start with Hendrik's presentation.
I won't be